these types of fish were also consuming these particles?
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe it's a little bit of good news in that the higher the trophic level, like bigger fish that eat higher on the food chain, so predators, we often see that they concentrate contaminants, things like heavy metals. So you might have seen warnings about limiting how much, fish. Finfish you eat due to heavy metals. And so one of the questions was whether they're also concentrating microplastics. The good news is that we actually found fewer microplastics in these higher trophic level or higher on the food chain fish, and that the microplastics were more concentrated in the tissue in some of the animals that we sampled lower on the food web, like pink shrimp and the herring and the lamprey. And so it's a little surprising in some ways, and in other ways, it's not surprising. They're likely acquiring them due to the way in which they feed and the locations where they feed. So, for an example, shrimp are feeding in the upper water column where there may be more microplastics. They're also maybe feeding at the fronts of currents where small animals like zooplankton and phytoplankton are accumulating. And we know that the currents can also move plastics into these fronts. So they might be feeding in areas where there's just a higher concentration of plastics. So in some ways it's surprising, in other ways it's not surprising.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating regardless, and important obviously to know what it is that's getting out there into the water and that they're consuming. When it comes to that, as far as some of these different species being things that are consumed by humans, what are the risk levels and I guess dangers? Is there anything from this study that really elevates any kind of concern when it comes to consuming them?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing I want to step back from is that it's not just in seafood that we're finding microplastics. So we find microplastics in our craft beer, we find microplastics in sea salt, in honey, in in water bottles and like plastic water bottles. We find it leaching out from tea bags that are made of synthetic material. A study came out in 2023 that found microplastics in grocery store purchased beef and chicken and pork, as well as veggie burgers and tofu. So I would say that staying away from like Oregon caught healthy seafood isn't gonna isn't necessarily the solution. I think instead we need to think about sources and how we reduce the sources. That said, the other prong of that is that we are increasingly seeing research indicating strong correlations between human diseases and microplastic concentrations or microparticle concentrations in different organs. So there's some research emerging. Again, it's not identifying a causation, but a correlation that there's in patients with increased severity of cardiac disease, that there's higher concentrations of microplastic particles being found in that heart tissue. Similarly with gut inflammation, and there's also a study on human fertility. So higher concentrations in testes led to reduced concentrations of sperm. There are some potential human health effects of consuming and inhaling in our air and drinking in our water microplastics. But I would say that stopping eating seafood is probably not the solution because there's so many other sources people are inhaling and consuming microplastics from, not just seafood.
So we're getting it pretty much from everywhere. So it is what I'm understanding with that.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, I guess my last question here with the study, or at least one of my last questions here, when it comes to these particular species that you did study, were there any noticeable or directly correlated ill effects for them in consuming this? Because obviously it's in their system. That's where you're finding this. Have we seen like a reduction in numbers or anything like that?
Yeah, so we are doing it's very hard to study that in the field. It's easier to study that in the lab where we can determine whether it's just microparticles or anthropogenic particles that are causing effects in terms of decreased growth or decreased reproduction. We have done some studies that indicate that microplastic exposure can decrease reproductive capacity in some organisms, but it's the way the study was set up. We're not able to determine that from this set of samples.
It sounds like, I mean, this is incredible information, that you've done here, that you're getting out to everybody and just finding this out. But it sounds like really what it comes down to is reduction of those particles going out into the ecosystem is really where a lot of concentration needs to be going.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, the bottom line is that what we put out into the environment from our washing machines, from our use of single-use plastics, what we put out ends up ultimately at some point in the environment. The recyclability of plastics is much lower than I think has been previously recognized, and so much of it ends up in the environment, which then is taken up by things that we eat, and so that once taken up, it may end up back on our plate. So as you said, the solution really is to be reducing how much is making it out into the environment, which it's to some extent starts with what products we're using.
Yeah, yeah, it really needs a real a big look there then to try to tackle all of this and from all of those different sources of where this is coming from. Well, Doctor, thank you, for having some time to join us too. I really appreciate going through this and understanding this a little bit more. Anything else that you think is really important for people to understand from this study?
Yeah, I mean, I like I was just saying, I think that each of us plays a role in making choices around what consumer products, so fast fashion, fast fashion clothing that's made cheaply and is not meant to last very long is going to shed a lot more fibers than more well-made products. That said, we also know that things like fleeces, after a certain number of washings, they start shedding less. And so buying reused clothes is a really good option to have less fibers being shed. And yeah, we can all play a role in the consumer choices we make.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for joining us. For everybody who wants to read more or learn more about your studies, is there a particular place that they should go to find that?
Oh yeah, we do on our website. It's the ACE Lab, ACE Lab at Portland State University. We do have a flyer on ways that folks can, other alternatives to plastic that people might be interested in. And that's a flyer that one can link to on our website.
Fantastic. Well, Doctor, thank you very much for being here. I really appreciate you walking through this study and really, educating everybody a little bit more on what it is that you found with that. And thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And for everybody watching, this is Fox 12 Now. We're going to sign off here, but I appreciate you joining us. And we do have a lot of segments for you to check out at our YouTube channel, Fox 12 Oregon YouTube, or at kptv.com under the Fox 12 Now tab, or on our apps. We cover a wide range of things on here. We get to have more in-depth discussions like we just did right here. So thanks for being a part